The silence in the VIP room was louder than a gunshot. Alistair Sterling, a man worth $4 billion, was sweating through his bespoke Italian suit. Across the mahogany table sat 3 stone-faced German executives, waiting for an answer that would determine the fate of the Western economy. Alistair opened his mouth, but nothing came out. He was helpless. The translator was gone. The deal was dead. That was until a tray crashed onto the side table, and the invisible girl in the apron, the one nobody had looked at twice, stepped forward. She didn't just pour the wine. She looked the German CEO in the eye and spoke a sentence that made his blood run cold. New York City doesn't sleep, but it definitely discriminates. Nowhere was that clearer than inside l'Orangerie, the kind of restaurant where a bottle of sparkling water cost more than an average person's hourly wage. For Sarah Evans, l'Orangerie wasn't a culinary experience. It was a battlefield. Table 4 needs water. Table 7 wants the Wagyu sent back because it looks too sad. Move Evans move. The maitre d', a man named Julian, who wore his disdain like a cheap cologne, snapped his fingers right next to Sarah's ear. Sarah didn't flinch. She just adjusted her apron, smoothed the stray lock of brown hair that always fell into her eyes, and grabbed the pitcher. At 26, Sarah was what high society called furniture. She was present, she was functional, but she wasn't a person. She was a pair of hands, serving filet mignon to men who controlled the stock market. To them, she was uneducated, unrefined help. They didn't know about the life she had left behind. They didn't know that the uneducated waitress spent her break times reading Goethe in the original text, or that the stain on her shoe was from walking 3 miles to work to save subway fare for her father's medical bills. Tonight was different. The air in the restaurant was thick-heavy, with a tension that usually preceded a hurricane. "The Sterling party," Julian hissed, grabbing Sarah's arm as she passed the kitchen doors. "They're 10 minutes out. I want the gold room spotless. If there is a single smudge on a wine glass, Sarah, you won't just be fired. I will ensure you never wait tables in this city again." Alistair Sterling. Even Sarah knew the name. He was the CEO of Sterling Aero, a defense contractor and tech giant that was currently plastered on the front page of every newspaper from Wall Street to Tokyo. He was young for a tycoon barely 40, known for his ruthless aggression and his terrifying blue eyes. Rumor had it, he was closing the biggest merger of the decade tonight. "I'll handle it, Julian," Sarah said, her voice soft but steady. She made her way to the gold room, a private dining area, soundproofed by heavy velvet curtains and oak paneling. She polished the silverware until she could see the distortion of her own tired face in the spoons. At 7:55 p.m., the doors burst open. Alistair Sterling didn't walk, he marched. He was flanked by 2 nervous-looking junior executives, but the man himself looked like a storm cloud contained in a 3-piece charcoal suit. He was handsome objectively, but the stress etched into his jawline made him look dangerous. He threw a leather portfolio onto the table and spun around to one of his aides, a young man named Kevin, who looked like he was about to vomit. "Where is Marcus?" Alistair barked. His voice was a low growl vibrating through the quiet room. Kevin fumbled with his phone. I'm calling him, sir. He's not picking up." "What do you mean he's not picking up?" Alistair stepped closer. "The delegation from Krophalle lands in this room in 12 minutes. Heinrich von Hurst does not speak English. He refuses to. He considers it a power move. If Marcus isn't here to translate the technical specs of the engine contracts, we are dead." Sarah, standing silently in the corner by the water station, tried to blend into the wallpaper. She saw Alistair's hand tremble slightly before he clenched it into a fist. This wasn't just a business deal. This was desperation. "Voicemail again," Kevin squeaked. Alistair ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, messing it up for the first time. "He's been poached. Has to be. Rival dynamics got to him. They knew tonight was the night." "Sir, can we use an app Google Translate?" the other aide suggested weakly. Alistair turned on him with a look of such withering scorn that the aide took a step back. "You want me to negotiate the sale of classified turbine schematics and a $4 billion merger using Google Translate one mistranslation on the liability clause, and I lose the company. I lose everything." The stakes were astronomical. Sarah watched as Alistair paced the room. He was trapped. A billionaire with all the power in the world rendered impotent by a language barrier. Sarah felt a strange sensation in her chest. It was a mixture of pity and a ghost of her past life. She bit her lip. "Don't do it," she told herself. "You need this job. Stay invisible." "Get me anyone," Alistair commanded, checking his Patek Philippe watch. "Call the agency. Get me a premium translator. Pay them triple, quadruple." "I'm trying, sir." "The agency is closed. The emergency line is busy." 7:58 p.m. The restaurant's heavy front doors opened downstairs. The host's voice drifted up, polite and terrified. "They're here," Alistair whispered. The color drained from his face. "Von Hurst is early. That German punctuality is going to kill me." Alistair Sterling, the Lion of Wall Street, looked at his two useless aides. He looked at the empty chair where his translator should have been. For a fleeting second, his eyes locked with Sarah's. He didn't see her, though. He just saw a witness to his upcoming execution. "Sit down," Alistair hissed to his team. "Smile. We fake it until Marcus gets here. If he doesn't, we stall." The velvet curtains parted. 3 men entered. They were older, dressed in suits that cost more than Sarah's childhood home. Leading them was Heinrich von Hurst. He was a giant of a man with silver hair and eyes like flint. He carried himself with the heavy historical weight of old European money. "Herr Sterling," von Hurst said. His voice was deep, gravelly, and utterly devoid of warmth. "Herr von Hurst." Alistair stood, extending a hand. "Welcome." Von Hurst shook the hand briefly, then dropped it. He looked around the room, his eyes scanning the empty chair, then settling on the 2 sweating aides. He said something rapid, sharp, and complex in German to his associates. The associates chuckled darkly. Alistair kept a frozen smile plastered on his face. He looked at Kevin. Kevin shrugged helplessly. They had no idea what had just been said. Sarah knew. She was pouring water into von Hurst's glass. Her hand didn't shake, but her heart hammered against her ribs. Von Hurst had just said, "Look at him. He sweats like a pig before the slaughter. He doesn't have his mouthpiece. We will tear this contract apart, piece by piece." Sarah retreated to the shadows. She watched the tragedy unfold in slow motion. Alistair gestured to the seats. "Please sit. Wine? We have a 1982 Petrus." Von Hurst sat. He waved a hand dismissively at the wine list. He placed a thick document on the table. He looked at Alistair and began to speak. It wasn't pleasantries. It was a stream of high-velocity technical German regarding the acquisition of Class A shares and the liquidation of assets. He stopped and waited. Silence stretched. Thick, suffocating silence. Alistair cleared his throat. My, translator is delayed. Traffic. New York, you know. He gave a weak laugh. Von Hurst didn't smile. He leaned forward, speaking English for the first time, heavily accented and mocking. You invite me to sign the future of my legacy, and you cannot understand what I say. You rely on a boy to speak for you. He's on his way, Alistair insisted, his voice rising. In the meantime, perhaps we can discuss the broad strokes in English. Von Hurst slammed his hand on the table. The cutlery rattled. No. Von Hurst switched back to German, shouting now. I will not conduct business in the language of the conqueror. You want my technology, you speak my language, or you admit you are too stupid to run this company. Alistair looked at Kevin. What did he say? Is he leaving? I think he's angry, sir. I know he's angry, you idiot, Alistair roared, losing his composure completely. Von Hurst stood up. He buttoned his jacket. He spoke to his associates, his tone final. Let's go. This is a waste of time. We will initiate the hostile takeover tomorrow morning. His stock will be worthless by noon. This was it. The end of Alistair Sterling. He was going to lose his company because of a traffic jam and a missing employee. He looked broken. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the sheer terror of a man watching his life's work burn. Sarah looked at the tray in her hands. She looked at Alistair's pale face. She looked at the smug satisfaction on Von Hurst's face. She thought of the rent due on Friday. She thought of Julian, the manager who told her she was nothing. Screw it, she thought. Sarah Evans stepped forward. She didn't walk like a waitress. She walked like she owned the floor. She bypassed Alistair, bypassed the aides, and stood directly in front of Heinrich von Hurst, blocking his path to the door. Alistair's eyes widened. What are you doing? Get out of the way. Sarah ignored him. She looked up at the towering German CEO. When she opened her mouth, the sound that came out wasn't the polite mumble of a servant. It was crisp, authoritative, and flawless. Hochdeutsch. High German, laced with the specific aristocratic dialect of the Hamburg financial elite. Herr von Hurst, Sarah said, her voice cutting through the tension like a razor blade. Sit down. You are not leaving. Because if you walk out that forward door, you trigger the penalty clause in the pre-agreement, which states that walking away from the table without reasonable cause forfeits your exclusivity rights to the turbine patent. And we both know the Japanese market is dying to get their hands on it. The room froze. Alistair's jaw dropped. Kevin dropped his phone. Von Hurst looked at this waitress, this girl in a cheap black apron, as if she had just grown a second head. He narrowed his eyes, studying her face. Who are you? Von Hurst asked in German, his voice quiet now. Sarah didn't flinch. I'm the person who is going to make sure nobody leaves this room until a deal is signed. Now sit. Please. The silence that followed Sarah's declaration was heavy physical. It pressed against the eardrums of everyone in the gold room. Heinrich von Hurst did not sit immediately. He stood like a monolith, his eyes narrowing as he dissected the woman standing before him. He looked at her cheap, rubber-soled black shoes. He looked at the fraying hem of her apron. Then he looked at her face. It was pale, devoid of makeup, framed by messy brown hair, but her eyes, hazel and sharp, held his gaze with a terrifying steadiness. Alistair Sterling was paralyzed. He had spent 20 years in boardrooms, swimming with sharks, but he had never seen anything like this. His brain was trying to recalibrate. The waitress. The girl he had ignored for 40 minutes. She had just threatened a man who ate competitors for breakfast. Von Hurst let out a low, rumbling sound. It might have been a laugh or a growl. "You speak of the penalty clause," Von Hurst replied in German, his voice dropping an octave, testing her. "But you are wearing an apron. Why should I listen to the threats of a servant?" Sarah didn't retreat. She didn't even put the tray down. She shifted her weight, adopting a posture that was less service industry and more diplomatic core. "Because, Herr von Hurst," Sarah replied in fluent, rapid-fire German. "The servant is the only one in this room who read the addendum to the Brussels Pact regarding intellectual property rights in the Eurozone. You can walk out. But your legal team will spend the next 5 years fighting Sterling Aero for breach of good faith. By the time you win, the technology will be obsolete. Do you want a lawsuit or do you want engines?" She gestured to the chair again. "Please, the Waitress is breathing perfectly." Von Hurst stared at her for 3 more seconds. Then the corner of his mouth twitched. He sat down. The tension in the room snapped like a rubber band. Alistair let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. He looked at Sarah wide-eyed, mouthing the word. What Sarah didn't look at him. She walked to the table, picked up the decanter of 1982 Waitress, and moved to Von Hurst's right side. "Translate," Alistair commanded, his voice shaky. "What just happened?" "He's staying," Sarah said, calmly pouring the wine. The red liquid swirled into the crystal glass. "But he thinks you're weak. He thinks you are unprepared. You need to regain control immediately." "How?" Alistair whispered. "Stop apologizing," Sarah murmured, barely moving her lips as she filled the next glass. "Open the portfolio to page 12. The schematics for the cooling system. He doesn't care about the money. He cares about the heat signature. Tell him the variance is less than 0.01%. Alistair stared at her. "How do you know that?" "I listened while I was polishing the forks," she said. "Page 12. Go." Alistair scrambled to open the leather binder. He found the page. He looked at Von Hurst, straightened his tie, and tried to channel the arrogance of a CEO. "Herr Von Hurst," Alistair said in English, "regarding the thermal efficiency." He paused, looking at Sarah. Sarah stood at the head of the table, hands clasped behind her back. She became the conduit. "Mr. Sterling wishes to draw your attention to the cooling architecture." She translated into German, but she did more than translate. She elevated his words. She took Alistair's nervous English and turned it into commanding technical German. She used words like Wärmeleitfähigkeit, thermal conductivity, and Strömungsmechanik, fluid mechanics, with the ease of a veteran engineer. Von Hurst picked up the document. He put on his reading glasses. He grunted. "The projection here says 98% efficiency. My engineers say this is impossible with current alloy limitations." Sarah listened, then turned to Alistair. "He says your numbers look fake. He's challenging the alloy composition." Alistair wiped sweat from his forehead. "Tell him it's a proprietary titanium graphene composite. It's never been used in civilian aerospace before. That's why it's expensive." Sarah turned back to the Germans. Her voice was hypnotic. She wasn't just repeating words. She was selling the dream. She leaned in, slightly engaging Von Hurst. "It is not a standard alloy, Herr Von Hurst. It is a graphene composite. You are not buying an engine. You are buying a monopoly on the next decade of flight. If you want standard alloys, go to the French. If you want the future, you sign with Sterling." Von Hurst looked up from the papers. He looked at Alistair, then he looked at Sarah. "The French make garbage," Von Hurst muttered. "Exactly," Sarah replied instantly. which is why you are here." For the next 2 hours, the Gold Room became a theater of high-stakes warfare. The food arrived: Wagyu beef, truffled mash, delicate greens. But nobody ate. Sarah was a machine. She navigated the treacherous waters of corporate finance and aerodynamic engineering. She smoothed over insults. She sharpened vague promises into concrete guarantees. She never sat down. She never took a sip of water. She managed the emotional temperature of the room as expertly as she managed the wine service. At one point, one of the junior German associates tried to slip a clause into the discussion about labor dispute liabilities. Sarah caught it before Alistair even blinked. "Excuse me," she interrupted the associate in German, her tone icy. "That was not in the term sheet discussed last week. If you wish to renegotiate labor liabilities, we will need to reopen the price per unit. Is that what you want?" The associate went pale. Von Hurst shot his subordinate a glare that could peel paint. "Strike the clause," Von Hurst barked. Alistair watched this happen with a growing sense of awe and confusion. Who was she? He watched her hands rough red from scrubbing with short, unpainted nails flipping through billion-dollar contracts. He watched the way she stood, shifting her weight from foot to ease the pain of a 12-hour shift, yet her face remained a mask of serene professionalism. It was 10:30 p.m. when Von Hurst finally closed the folder. He took a gold fountain pen from his pocket. The scratching sound of the nib against the paper was the loudest sound in the world. He signed. He pushed the papers across the table to Alistair. Alistair signed. His hand was shaking just a little. The deal was done. $4 billion. Saved. Von Hurst stood up. The giant German looked exhausted but satisfied. He buttoned his jacket and turned not to Alistair but to Sarah. He extended his hand. Sarah hesitated. A waitress does not shake hands with a billionaire guest. It was against every rule of l'orangerie. "You have a sharp mind, Fräulein," Von Hurst said in English, his accent thick. "And a sharper tongue. Your father taught you well." Sarah stiffened. A shadow passed over her face, dark and painful. "Thank you, sir." "Sterling." Von Hurst nodded to Alistair. "You are lucky. Very lucky. Do not lose this one." The Germans turned and marched out of the room. The heavy doors swung shut behind them. The silence returned, but this time it wasn't tense. It was the vacuum left after an explosion. Alistair Sterling slumped back in his chair, exhaling a breath that seemed to last for a minute. He loosened his tie. He looked at the signed contract. Then he looked up at the waitress standing by the wall. She looked ready to collapse. The adrenaline was fading, leaving her trembling. She reached for the dirty plates, reverting instantly to her role. "Don't touch the plates," Alistair said. His voice was hoarse. Sarah stopped. "I have to clear the table, sir." "My manager." "Leave the damn plates," Alistair said. He stood up slowly. He walked around the table until he was standing 3 feet from her. He looked at her as if seeing her for the very first time. "Who are you?" he asked. Sarah Evans gripped the edge of the table to steady herself. The magic of the negotiation was gone. The linguistic armor she had worn for the last 2 hours had dissolved, leaving her just a waitress again, a waitress who had likely just broken a dozen protocols. "I'm just the server, Mr. Sterling," she said quietly, eyes lowering to his expensive Italian leather shoes. "I apologize for overstepping. I saw you were in trouble." "Overstepping?" Alistair let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. "You just negotiated a hostile liquidity clause on a graphene turbine engine. You didn't overstep, you just saved my entire career. Now I am going to ask you again. Who are you? He stepped closer. The intensity in his blue eyes was overwhelming. You speak Hamburg dialect. You know contract law. You understand fluid dynamics. You are not just a server. Sarah took a step back, clutching the empty wine bottle like a shield. I need to go. Julian is going to be furious that I'm still in here. I don't care about Julian, Alistair snapped. I'll buy this restaurant and fire Julian if it keeps you in this room for 5 more minutes. The door burst open. Speaking of the devil, Julian the maitre d' stormed in. His face was a mask of panic and rage. He saw the dirty dishes still on the table, the guests gone, and Sarah standing too close to the VIP. Sarah, Julian hissed, marching over. What are you doing? The guests left 5 minutes ago. Why is this table not cleared, Mr. Sterling? I am so terribly sorry. Has this girl been bothering you? She is— Shut up, Alistair said. He didn't even look at Julian. He kept his eyes locked on Sarah. Julian froze, his mouth hanging open. Excuse me, sir. I said shut up. Alistair repeated his voice, dangerously calm. Get out. Take my assistants with you. I want the room clear. Now. But, sir, the bill. Kevin the aide stammered. Kevin, get out before I fire you. Alistair barked. Kevin grabbed the other aide. Julian bowed awkwardly, and they scrambled out the door. The lock clicked. Now it was just Alistair Sterling and Sarah Evans, the billionaire and the waitress. Alistair pulled out a chair, one of the chairs the Germans had sat in. Sit down. I can't sit, sir. I'm on the clock. Sit down. Sarah sat. She felt ridiculous in her apron, sitting at a table with white linens worth more than her car. Alistair poured the remaining Petrus into 2 glasses. He slid one to her. Drink. Mr. Sterling, it's $1,000 bottle of wine. Drink it. You earned it. Sarah took the glass. Her hand shook, the red liquid rippling. She took a sip. It tasted like oak and berries, and memories she had tried to bury. Alistair sat opposite her, studying her face. You're educated. University of Munich, Heidelberg. Sarah stared into the wine. There was no point in lying. He would find out anyway. Men like Alistair Sterling always found out. Zurich, she whispered. ETH Zurich. Double major in international law and mechanical engineering. Alistair raised an eyebrow. ETH. That's the MIT of Europe. So what is an ETH graduate doing scraping leftovers into a bin at l'Orangerie? Sarah's grip on the glass tightened until her knuckles turned white. Life happens, Mr. Sterling. My father. He got sick. Cancer. The insurance didn't cover the experimental treatments. I liquidated everything. The savings, the apartment, the stocks. Then the debts came. Student loans, his business debts. She looked up, her eyes wet but fierce. You know how fast money disappears in this city. I needed a job that paid cash immediately. No background checks, no waiting periods. So I served steak. Alistair leaned back, processing this. Your father. Von Hurst mentioned him. He taught you well. Who is he? Sarah hesitated. This was the dangerous part. The name was poison in certain circles. Friedrich Evans, she said softly. Alistair's eyes widened slightly. Friedrich Evans. The diplomat. The one involved in the Berlin trade scandal of 2015. He was innocent, Sarah said, her voice turning hard. He was framed by his partners. They used him as a scapegoat to cover up embezzlement. He lost his reputation, his money, and eventually his life. But he taught me everything before he died. He taught me to read people like Von Hurst. A silence stretched between them. Alistair looked at her with a new expression. It wasn't just gratitude anymore. It was calculation. "You're wasted here," Alistair said bluntly. "You're driving a Ferrari in a school zone." "I'm paying my bills, Mr. Sterling. That's all that matters." Sarah stood up. "I really have to go. Julian will be waiting to write me up." "Wait." Alistair stood up too. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a sleek black business card. But he didn't hand it to her. He held it, tapping it against the table. "My translator, Marcus. He didn't just miss a call." Alistair said, his mind racing. He knew the technical specs. He knew the time. For him to ghost me tonight, that wasn't an accident. That was sabotage. Sarah paused. "You think someone paid him to stay away?" "I think my competitor's Aerotech paid him to ensure the Von Hurst deal failed. If I hadn't had you, a stock would have crashed tomorrow, and Aerotech would have bought my company for pennies on the dollar." Alistair looked at Sarah. He saw an asset, a weapon. Someone who was invisible, underestimated, and brilliant. "I have a summit in Berlin next week," Alistair said slowly. "The G7 Technology Summit. I need to close 3 more deals to solidify Sterling Aero's position. But I can't trust my staff. I can't trust the agency translators. I don't know who is on the payroll." He looked her dead in the eye. "I need you." Sarah laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Mr. Sterling, I have a shift tomorrow at 11 a.m. "I will pay you $50,000, Alistair said. The laughter died in Sarah's throat. The room spun. "What, 50,000? Cash, for 1 week? You come to Berlin with me. You act as my personal consultant and translator. You vet the contracts. You listen to what they say when they think I'm not listening." $50,000. That was 2 years of rent. That was freedom. That was the debt collectors off her back. I can't," Sarah stammered. "I don't have clothes for that. I don't have a passport that's valid. Wait, no, I do have a passport." She stopped, her mind warring with itself. "Mr. Sterling, people will talk. A CEO bringing a waitress to the G7. "They won't see a waitress," Alistair said, walking around the table to stand beside her. He looked at her reflection in the dark window, the apron, the messy hair. "We'll fix the clothes. We'll fix the hair. By the time we land in Berlin, you won't be Sarah the server. You'll be Sarah Evans, Executive Vice President of External Affairs." "That's fraud," she whispered. "That's business," he corrected. "And right now you are the only person in the world I trust precisely because nobody knows who the hell you are." He held out the black card. 50,000, plus expenses. "And if we pull this off, I'll wipe your father's remaining debts. All of them." Sarah looked at the card. She thought of her aching feet. She thought of the way Julian snapped his fingers at her like she was a dog. She thought of her father dying in a rented room, telling her that she was meant for great things. She reached out and took the card. Her hand was steady. "1 week," Sarah said, "but I have conditions." Alistair smiled. It was the first genuine smile she had seen on him all night. It made him look younger, less like a statue, and more like a man. "Name them." "First," Sarah said, untying her apron and letting it drop to the floor, a pile of dirty black fabric. "You explain to Julian why I'm quitting. I want to watch." Alistair chuckled. "Done." "And the second," Sarah looked up at him, her hazel eyes flashing with a spark of the brilliance that had stunned von Hurst. "If we go to Berlin," she said, "I'm not just translating. If I see a bad deal, I kill it. You listen to me. No ego. If I say walk, we walk. If I say sign, we sign. In that room, I am not your employee. I am your partner." "Agreed," Alistair Sterling. A man who answered to no one looked at this woman who had nothing yet demanded everything. "Agreed," Alistair said. "Then let's go," Sarah said. "We have a plane to catch." But as they walked towards the door, Sarah didn't know that the sabotage went deeper than a missing translator. She didn't know that by accepting this offer, she was placing a target on her back. And she certainly didn't know that the man who had ruined her father was waiting for them in Berlin. The walk from the gold room to the front entrance of l'Orangerie felt longer than a marathon. For 3 years, Sarah had walked these floors with her head down, eyes scanning for empty glasses and crumpled napkins. She had made herself small, compressing her existence into the space between tables. Now, walking beside Alistair Sterling, she felt exposed. The heavy oak paneling seemed to vibrate with the aftershocks of the negotiation. Julian was waiting by the host stand. His face was a road map of indignation. He checked his watch, then tapped a manicured fingernail against the reservation book. When he saw Sarah sans apron walking next to the billionaire rather than behind him, his mouth tightened into a thin, pale line. "Sarah," Julian said, his voice dripping with that specific, sickly sweet poison he reserved for subordinates who stepped out of line. "You have abandoned your station for 45 minutes. The buses are overwhelmed. Get back to the floor immediately or don't bother coming back tomorrow." Sarah stopped. She looked at the man who had docked her pay for being 3 minutes late during a snowstorm. She looked at the restaurant that smelled of truffle oil and humiliation. She opened her mouth, but Alistair spoke first. "She won't be back tomorrow," Alistair said. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't even stop walking. He simply tossed a phrase over his shoulder as one might discard a used wrapper. "Or the day after." Julian blinked, stepping into Alistair's path, a dangerous mistake. "Excuse me, Mr. Sterling. With all due respect, this is a personnel matter. Sarah is contractually obligated to give 2 weeks' notice." Alistair stopped. He turned slowly, his height and the cut of his suit casting a shadow over the smaller man. The air in the foyer grew cold. "Send the bill for her notice period to my office," Alistair said, his voice low, devoid of emotion. "Add a penalty fee for wasting my time right now. And Julian, if you ever speak to her in that tone again, I will buy this building, evict this restaurant, and turn it into a parking garage. Do you understand?" Julian went mute. His eyes darted from Alistair to Sarah, terrified confusion washing over him. Sarah looked at Julian one last time. She didn't feel triumph. She didn't feel anger. She just felt finished. "Goodbye, Julian," she said softly. They pushed through the heavy revolving doors and into the biting New York night. The city noise sirens honking the hum of millions of lives hit Sarah like a physical wave. It was raining a cold drizzle that slicked the pavement with neon reflections. A black Maybach pulled up to the curb, instantly gliding like a shark through dark water. The driver, a broad-shouldered man, with eyes that scanned the street constantly, held the door open. "Get in," Alistair said. Sarah hesitated. The leather interior looked softer than her bed. This was the threshold. Once she got in that car, Sarah, the waitress, was dead. She slid inside. The door thudded shut, sealing out the noise of the city. The silence was absolute, smelling of rich leather and cedarwood. Alistair settled in beside her. He looked tired now, the adrenaline of the deal fading to reveal the exhaustion of a man fighting a war on all fronts. He tapped on the partition glass. "Teterboro Airport. Call the pilot. We fly in 2 hours." "We're going to Berlin tonight," Sarah asked, her voice sounding small in the acoustic quiet of the cabin. "The summit starts in 48 hours. We have work to do. You need clothes. You need a briefing. You need to become someone else." Alistair pulled a tablet from the seat pocket and handed it to her. The screen glowed blue, illuminating his sharp features. "This is the dossier on Krupp Haller," he said. "Memorize it. But more importantly, look at the last file." Sarah swiped a finger across the glass. A photo appeared. It was a grainy surveillance shot of a man entering a black sedan. "That's Marcus," Alistair said, staring out the rain-streaked window. "My missing translator." "He looks fine," Sarah noted. "He is fine. He's better than fine. That photo was taken an hour ago, entering the headquarters of Aerotech." Alistair's jaw clenched. "He sold the schedule. He sold the vulnerability. He left me in that room to die." Sarah looked at the photo, a chill running deeper than the cold outside. This wasn't just corporate rivalry. This was espionage. "Who runs Aerotech?" Sarah asked, though a pit was forming in her stomach. She already feared the answer. Alistair turned to her. "A man named Victor Cray." The tablet slipped from Sarah's fingers, landing softly on the floor mat. Victor Cray. The name was a ghost from her past. The man who had been her father's partner. The man who had smiled at her graduation, shaken her father's hand, and then methodically dismantled his life frame by frame, lie by lie. Victor Cray was the reason her father died penniless and disgraced. "Are you okay?" Alistair asked, noticing her sudden pallor. Sarah stared straight ahead, her eyes hardening. The fear evaporated, replaced by a cold, burning resolve. She wasn't just doing this for the money anymore. "I'm fine," Sarah lied, her voice steady, darker. She picked up the tablet. "Tell the driver to drive faster." Till across the street from the restaurant in a parked grey sedan with tinted windows, a man watched the Maybach pull away. He lifted a phone to his ear. "She's with him," the watcher said. "The waitress. She's in the car." "Interesting," a voice on the other end replied, smooth, cultured, and cruel. "Sterling found a stray. Find out who she is. And if she becomes a problem, remove her." The Gulfstream G650 climbed through 30,000 feet, leaving the rain and the grime of New York far below. Inside the cabin was a sanctuary of cream leather and polished walnut, silent, save for the soft hum of the engines and the clinking of ice in a crystal tumbler. Sarah sat in a swivel chair, staring at the garment bag hanging on the closet door. It was zipped shut, black and ominous like a body bag. "Open it," Alistair said. He was sitting across from her, his laptop open, a single reading light illuminating his sharp features. He hadn't looked up from the screen for 20 minutes. Sarah stood up. Her legs felt heavy. The adrenaline of the restaurant had worn off, replaced by a deep, bone-weary exhaustion and a simmering anxiety about where she was going. She unzipped the bag. Inside was a suit. Not just a suit, a weapon. It was a charcoal grey pantsuit, tailored with surgical precision. Beside it hung a silk blouse, the colour of heavy cream, and a pair of black stilettos that looked both elegant and severe. "My stylist had your measurements estimated from the security footage in the restaurant," Alistair said, finally looking up. "It's a terrifying invasion of privacy, I know, but we don't have time for a tailor." It's excessive, Sarah murmured, touching the fabric. It was cashmere wool, softer than anything she had touched in years. It's camouflage, Alistair corrected. In Berlin, you are not Sarah Evans. You are not a waitress. You are my right hand. If you look like you don't belong, they will eat you alive. The men we are meeting, Cray, the Russians, the Saudis, they smell weakness. They smell poverty. That suit masks the scent. Sarah took the clothes to the small, lavish bathroom at the back of the jet. She stripped off the black uniform she had worn for 8 hours, the uniform that smelled of stale wine and other people's food. She washed her face, scrubbing away the grease and the fatigue. When she stepped out, she was different. The suit fit as if it had been molded to her skin. It straightened her spine. The heels added 3 inches to her height, forcing her to walk with a deliberate, rhythmic cadence. She had pulled her messy hair back into a severe, sleek bun. Alistair stopped typing. He watched her walk down the aisle of the jet. He didn't smile. He studied her with the cold, assessing gaze of an investor looking at a high-yield asset. "Better," he said. "Now sit. We have 6 hours of flight time. I want you to tell me everything you know about Victor Cray." Sarah froze as she settled into the leather seat. The name felt like a shard of glass in her throat. "I told you. I know his reputation. He's ruthless." "You dropped the tablet, Sarah." Alistair closed his laptop. The cabin went dim. "People don't drop things because of a reputation. They drop things because of trauma. Did you work for him? Did he fire you?" Sarah looked out the window into the pitch-black void of the Atlantic Ocean. She couldn't tell Alistair the truth. Not yet. If he knew she was Friedrich Evans' daughter, the daughter of the man disgraced for embezzlement, he would see her as a liability. He would ground the plane and kick her out. "He hurt a friend of mine." Sarah lied. The lie tasted like ash. "A long time ago. He destroyed her small business to make way for a warehouse. It was personal." Alistair watched her for a long moment. He was a human lie detector, a man who made billions reading bluffs. But he saw the pain in her eyes, and he decided it was useful. Pain was fuel. "Good," Alistair said softly. "Keep that. I don't need you to be objective about Cray. I need you to hate him, because when we land, he is going to try to destroy us. He has already compromised my translator. He will have spies in the hotel. He will be watching every move we make." He slid a thick binder across the table. "This is the technical data for the hydrogen cell merger. Memorize the failure rates on page 40. If Cray questions the safety protocols, you need to be able to quote the ISO standards better than his own chief engineer." For the rest of the flight, they didn't sleep. They worked. It was an intellectual dance. Alistair would throw complex legal scenarios at her. What if the German labor union strikes? What if the euro drops and Sarah would parry them? Her mind waking up from its 3-year slumber. She wasn't just translating. She was strategizing. She remembered the lessons her father had taught her over dinner tables in Geneva and Brussels. She remembered the rhythm of power. By the time the pilot announced their descent into Berlin, the sun was rising over a grey steel landscape. Sarah looked at Alistair. His eyes were red-rimmed, but he looked electric. "Ready?" he asked. Sarah looked at her reflection in the dark window. The waitress was gone. The woman looking back was a ghost who had climbed out of the grave to settle a score. "I'm ready," she said. Berlin was cold. It was a wet, penetrating cold that seeped through the layers of cashmere and wool. The motorcade from the airport to the city centre was swift, a blur of grey concrete and historical monuments that Sarah barely registered. They were staying at the Hotel Adlon Kempinski, the crown jewel of Berlin. Hospitality, located right next to the Brandenburg Gate, it was a place of heavy carpets, gold leaf, and hushed whispers. "Check-in is handled," Alistair said, as they swept through the lobby flanked by 2 security guards. "We have the presidential suite. You take the guest wing. We have 2 hours before the pre-summit reception." "Who will be there?" Sarah asked, her heels clicking sharply on the marble. "Everyone," Alistair replied. "The Chancellor, the Japanese delegation, and Aerotech." 2 hours later, Sarah stood in front of the full-length mirror in her suite. Alistair had provided a gown for the evening event. It wasn't a fairy tale dress. It was midnight blue floor-length with long sleeves and a high neck. It was modest, severe, and incredibly expensive. It commanded respect, not attention. She applied a dark shade of red lipstick, her war paint. She met Alistair in the main salon of the suite. He was wearing a tuxedo that fit him perfectly, but he looked tense. He was pacing, checking his phone. "No signal from my security team about Cray's position," Alistair muttered. "He's ghosting. I don't like it." He stopped and looked at Sarah. He nodded once, acknowledging her readiness. "Remember," Alistair said as they walked to the elevator, "you are Sarah Evans, VP of External Affairs. You speak only when I signal. You translate exactly what they say, including the insults, especially the insults." "I understand," Sarah said. The elevator doors opened onto the ballroom floor. The noise hit them first, a low roar of polite conversation in a dozen languages, overlaid with the clinking of champagne flutes and the string quartet playing Mozart. They stepped into the light. Heads turned. Alistair Sterling was a celebrity in this world, a man on the brink of either global dominance or total collapse. And everyone wanted to know who the woman beside him was. Sarah felt the eyes on her skin. She kept her chin high, her face a mask of bored indifference. "Keep moving," Alistair whispered. "Don't make eye contact until we find the host." They navigated the sea of sharks in tuxedos. Sarah picked up snippets of conversation as they passed Russian oil prices, French labor strikes, American interest rates, and then the sea parted. Standing near the ice sculpture, holding a glass of scotch, was a man surrounded by sycophants. He was in his 60s, tanned with silver hair swept back and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He looked like a benevolent grandfather. But Sarah knew better. She knew that behind those manicured hands lay the ruin of her family. Victor Cray. Sarah's breath hitched. Her heart hammered against her ribs so hard she thought the silk of her dress would vibrate. The room seemed to tilt. "He's right there," she thought. "The man who killed my father." Alistair felt her falter. He gripped her elbow hard, a stabilizing force. "Steady," he murmured. "He's coming over." Cray had spotted them. He handed his glass to a subordinate and walked toward them, his arms open wide in a gesture of mock friendship. "Alistair," Cray boomed, his voice rich and baritone. "I heard you had some trouble in New York. A missing translator." How dreadful. It was a power move, admitting he knew about the trouble, implying he caused it. Alistair didn't flinch. "Minor administrative hiccups, Victor. You know how hard it is to find good help these days. But we manage." Cray's eyes shifted to Sarah. He scanned her face. Sarah stopped breathing. She waited for the spark of recognition. She waited for him to say, "You look just like Friedrich." But Cray just smiled a shark's smile. He didn't recognize her. To him, Friedrich Evans was just a bug he had crushed 5 years ago. He didn't remember the daughter. "And who is this?" Cray asked, stepping closer, invading her personal space. "I don't believe we've met. Did you hire a model to distract me?" "Alistair." Sarah looked at Alistair. He gave a microscopic nod. Sarah stepped forward. She looked Victor Cray in the eye. "I'm Sarah Evans," she said, her voice clear and steady, projecting so the nearby circle could hear. "Executive Vice President of External Affairs for Sterling Aero. And I am not here to distract you, Mr. Cray. I am here to ensure that when my CEO speaks, you understand every single word." Cray's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. He looked at her name. Evans. It clearly meant nothing to him yet. "VP," Cray chuckled, looking back at Alistair. "A meteoric rise, or is she just a placeholder for the merger you're desperate to close?" Cray switched languages. He looked at his German associate and spoke rapidly in a localized Bavarian dialect, a slang, heavy, difficult form of German that most foreigners, even fluent ones, struggled with. "Look at the legs on this one," Cray said in Bavarian to his friend. "Sterling brought a whore to a business meeting. We'll crush him in the negotiations tomorrow. He's thinking with his dick, not his head." Cray turned back to Alistair, smiling innocently. "I was just telling my colleague how lovely your associate looks." Alistair looked at Sarah. He didn't know Bavarian. He waited. Sarah turned to Cray. She offered him a smile that was razor-sharp. "Actually, Mr. Cray," Sarah said, responding in perfect, flawless Bavarian, mimicking his specific regional accent down to the vowel sounds. "You said I was a whore and that you intend to crush us tomorrow. But I would advise you to focus less on my legs and more on your own supply chain. Because we know about the lithium shortage in your batteries, and by tomorrow morning, so will the Japanese delegation." The silence that fell over the group was absolute. Cray's face went from tan to a sickly shade of grey. The glass in his associate's hand shook. Sarah turned to Alistair, switching back to English. "He complimented my dress, sir, and he is very worried about tomorrow." Alistair looked at Cray's stunned face. A slow, predatory smile spread across Alistair's lips. He realized he wasn't just holding a translator. He was holding a loaded gun. "Shall we get a drink, Sarah?" Alistair said. "We shall, sir." They walked away, leaving Victor Cray standing in the middle of the ballroom, looking at Sarah's back with a dawning, terrifying realization that the game had just changed. The morning sun over Berlin was blinding, but inside the conference room of the Reichstag, the mood was funereal for Victor Cray. The threat Sarah had whispered the night before hadn't been a bluff. By 8:00 a.m., the rumor of Aerotech's lithium shortage had leaked to the Asian markets. By 9:00 a.m., their stock had dipped 12%. By 10:00 a.m., the Japanese delegation had walked away from Cray's table and sat down at Alistair Sterling's. The signing ceremony was brief. Alistair signed the tripartite agreement that solidified Sterling Aero as the dominant force in global aviation. Victor Cray sat 3 seats away, watching his empire crumble in real time. He looked aged, his tan looking more like jaundice under the harsh fluorescent lights. When the room cleared, Cray remained seated. Alistair packed his briefcase, the click of the latches echoing in the empty hall. Sarah stood by the window, watching the tourists gather at the Brandenburg Gate. "You orchestrated the leak," Cray said, his voice hollow. He didn't look up. "You destroyed a 30-year legacy in 12 hours. Alistair stopped. "You tried to destroy me first, Victor. You bribed my translator. You tried to humiliate me. This is just business." "It wasn't business." Cray spat, finally looking up with venomous eyes. He pointed a trembling finger at Sarah. "It was her. She knew exactly where to hit. She knew the internal codes. She knew the supply chain vulnerabilities. Who is she, Alistair? Who is this witch?" Sarah turned from the window. The light caught the sharp angle of her jaw. She walked slowly toward the table, her heels clicking a death knell on the parquet floor. She didn't look like a waitress anymore. She looked like a judge. "You still don't remember," Sarah said quietly. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small, worn photograph. It was an old Polaroid of two men laughing on a sailboat. One was Victor Cray. The other was a man with kind eyes and a weary smile. She slid the photo across the table. Cray looked at it. His breath hitched. Friedrich Evans died in a studio apartment in Queens," Sarah said, her voice devoid of tears, cold as the Berlin winter. "He couldn't afford heat in his final winter because you froze his assets. You framed him for the embezzlement you committed. You toasted to his health while you signed the papers that ruined him." Cray looked up at her, horror dawning on his face. You are the little girl, Sarah." "I am the daughter who watched him fade away," Sarah said. "He told me everything, Victor. He taught me your strategies. He taught me your weaknesses. And he told me that one day, arrogance would be your undoing." She leaned in, placing her hands on the table. "I didn't just translate the deal, Victor. I wrote the clause that excludes aerotech from the European supply chain for the next 10 years. You aren't just beaten. You are obsolete." Cray slumped back in his chair, defeated by a ghost. Sarah turned to Alistair. "I'm ready to go now, sir." Alistair looked from Cray to Sarah. He saw the fire in her, the loyalty and the brilliance. He realized that the $50,000 he had promised her was an insult. She wasn't an employee. She was the missing piece. They walked out of the Reichstag and into the cold, clean air. "So," Alistair said, stopping by the waiting car, "Sarah Evans, daughter of Friedrich, avenger of the fallen." "I'm sorry I lied about my identity," Sarah said, looking down. "I needed the job." "You don't have a job anymore," Alistair said. Sarah's heart dropped. "I understand. I'll pack my things and—" "You don't have a job," Alistair interrupted, a smile touching his eyes, "because I'm making you a partner. Legal and strategy. Name your salary. Name your terms. But you stay. We have a lot of enemies, Sarah, and I need someone who speaks the language of war." Sarah looked at the billionaire who had given her a chance when she was invisible. She looked at the city where her father had once been happy. "My terms." Sarah smiled, and for the first time it was a smile of pure freedom. "First, we never eat at l'Orangerie again." Alistair laughed, opening the car door for her. "Deal." And that is the story of how Sarah Evans went from clearing tables to clearing out the competition. She proved that the most powerful person in the room isn't always the one with the loudest voice or the most expensive suit. Sometimes it's the one holding the tray, listening to every word you say. It's a reminder that everyone has a story, and you never know who you are really talking to. Alistair Sterling found a partner because he looked past the apron. Victor Cray lost everything because he couldn't see past his own ego. What would you have done in Sarah's shoes? Would you have taken the revenge or taken the money and ran? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of justice, betrayal, and high-stakes business, please smash that. like button. It really helps the channel. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you don't miss our next story. We have a thriller coming up next week about a homeless man who finds a lottery ticket in a billionaire's trash. You won't want to miss it. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.